My name is Margot, and for as long as I can remember, there has been one strict rule in our family home: never go down into the basement. My mother repeated it so often that it became almost like a prayer, a commandment carved into my mind. "That place is dangerous," she would say, with a sternness that left no room for argument. "Promise me you will never open that door." As a child, I didn't question her. The basement door, with its rusted handle and creaking hinges, was always locked, and when I asked why, she would change the subject or distract me with something else. If I lingered near it too long, her voice would rise with unusual urgency. It wasn't like my mother to shout, but when it came to the basement, her fear was louder than her authority. Our house itself was old, passed down from my grandparents, built in the late 1940s. It was the kind of place where the floorboards groaned when you walked at night, and the wind whistled through the cracks in the windows. To anyone else, the basement door might have looked unremarkable, just another part of a creaky house. But to me, it felt like a wall between the world I knew and something darker that I wasn't supposed to understand. I grew up watching other kids in the neighborhood play hide and seek in their basements, turning them into game rooms or storage spaces, while ours remained forbidden territory. The few times I dared to ask my father about it, he would only clear his throat and mumble that the basement wasn't safe structurally, that the foundation was unstable. But his eyes never met mine when he said it, and I could tell it was a rehearsed excuse, not the truth. As I grew older, I began to notice other things too. The way my mother's hands trembled whenever she carried laundry down the hallway past the basement door, or how she would flinch at even the faintest rattling sound coming from beneath the floorboards. Sometimes at night, when the house was quiet, I could swear I heard faint noises from below, the scrape of something heavy being moved, or what sounded disturbingly like a whisper carried up through the vents. When I asked my mother about those sounds, she insisted it was just the pipes, the old furnace, or the wind, but the tightness in her voice betrayed her. By the time I turned 20, curiosity had begun to gnaw at me. What secret was worth so much fear? Why was my mother, a woman who had survived hardships I couldn't even imagine, so terrified of a simple basement? The thought lingered, whispering in my mind every time I walked past that locked door. Still, life has a way of distracting us. I went to college, moved away for a few years, and tried to build my independence. My father passed away during that time, a sudden heart attack, and I returned home to help my mother. That's when the rule became even stricter. With my father gone, my mother seemed almost consumed by her determination to keep me away from the basement. One evening, after a tense dinner where she scolded me for leaving laundry piled in the hallway, I asked her directly, "What are you so afraid I'll find down there, Mom?" Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. For a long moment she just stared at me, and then she whispered, "There are things you are better off not knowing, Margot. Things that can't be undone once you see them." Her words chilled me. What kind of things? That was the first time I realized the truth. Whatever was in the basement wasn't just about creaky floors or bad pipes. It was about secrets. Secrets that had been buried beneath our house, waiting for someone brave, or foolish, enough to uncover them. And though I tried to respect her fears, a part of me knew it was only a matter of time before curiosity won. Because the one thing my mother never seemed to understand was this: the more you tell someone not to look, the more desperate they become to see. The night I first decided to break my mother's rule wasn't planned. It wasn't some carefully thought-out rebellion, but rather a moment born of frustration, loneliness, and a deep hunger for the truth that had been festering inside me for years. It was late, past midnight, when I found myself pacing the hallway outside my bedroom, unable to sleep. My mother was already asleep in her room at the far end of the house, her door shut tight. The house was dark, but the faint glow of the streetlight outside cast thin stripes of light across the carpet through the blinds. And then, as if drawn by some invisible pull, my steps carried me toward the one place I had been forbidden to go, the basement door. For as long as I had lived in that house, the basement door had always been locked. I assumed the key was hidden away somewhere, though I had never seen my parents use it. But that night, as I ran my fingers over the cool brass handle, something strange happened. The handle moved. Slowly, Hesitantly, I pressed down. To my shock, the latch clicked open with ease. My heart thundered in my chest. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Had my mother forgotten to lock it? That seemed impossible. She was meticulous about this one thing, more than anything else in her life. And yet, here it was. The barrier between me and the truth had unlocked itself as though it were waiting for me. I told myself I was only going to look for a second. Just open the door, maybe peek down the staircase, and then close it again before my conscience, or my mother's voice in my head, stopped me. The hinges groaned as the door swung open, releasing a wave of air that was heavy with the scent of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic, almost like rust or blood. A shiver ran down my spine. The staircase stretched down into shadows, each step swallowed by darkness. I should have turned back then. Every instinct screamed at me to close the door, to go back to bed, to pretend this never happened. But something else, curiosity, stubbornness, maybe even defiance, pushed me forward. I stepped onto the first stair, and it creaked under my weight, echoing through the silence of the house. I held my breath and waited, half expecting my mother's voice to cut through the night, demanding to know what I was doing. But the house remained still. I descended slowly, each step groaning like a warning. The air grew colder, heavier, as if I were sinking into another world. By the time I reached the bottom, my skin was prickled with goosebumps. I fumbled along the wall until my fingers brushed against an old pull chain. I gave it a tug, and a single bare bulb flickered to life above me. The light was dim, casting long, shifting shadows across the basement. Dust motes floated in the air, disturbed by my arrival. For a moment, I just stood there, my eyes scanning the space. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Stacks of boxes lined the walls, covered in layers of dust. Shelves sagged under the weight of old jars, tools, and forgotten junk. A broken washing machine sat in the corner, its enamel chipped and rusted. But then I noticed something that didn't belong. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a row of shelves, was a set of heavy metal filing cabinets. Unlike the rest of the clutter, these were perfectly aligned, their surfaces clean and free of dust. Someone had been down here recently, maintaining them. My pulse quickened. I approached cautiously, my footsteps muffled on the concrete floor. The drawers were locked, but one of them, the bottom one, was slightly ajar. I knelt down and tugged it open. Inside were stacks of envelopes, neatly tied with twine. Some were yellowed with age, the edges brittle. Others looked newer, as if they had been placed there only months ago. My hands trembled as I picked one up. The handwriting on the front was elegant, precise, and unmistakably my father's. I hadn't seen his handwriting in years. Seeing it now, after his death, felt like being punched in the chest. The envelope was addressed not to my mother, not to me, but to someone I had never heard of before. The name written in bold, careful letters was Clara Whitmore. My mind spun. Who was Clara? Why would my father write to her? I opened the envelope, my fingers clumsy with nerves. Inside was a letter, dated almost 15 years ago. The words blurred at first, my eyes struggling to focus, but then the meaning hit me with full force. My dearest Clara, I promise you I'll find a way to balance this. They don't know about you, and they must never know. Margot is too young to understand, and Eleanor, well, Eleanor would never forgive me, but you and the children mean the world to me. I will keep supporting you, no matter what it takes. I dropped the letter as if it had burned me. Children? Supporting her? My father, the man who had raised me with strict morals, who had preached honesty and loyalty, had another family? The basement suddenly felt smaller, the air tighter, pressing in on me. My stomach churned. My mother's fear, my father's evasions, the locked basement. Was this what they had been hiding all along? I gathered the letter back into the envelope, my mind racing with questions. Who was Clara? Where were these children? Did my mother know? Had she known all this time, and that was why she guarded the basement so fiercely? And most terrifying of all, if this was only one letter in one envelope, What secrets did the rest of the boxes hold? I stood frozen, staring at the drawers that seemed to stretch into infinity, filled with truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face. And yet, I knew there was no turning back now. The forbidden door had been opened, and with it, a part of my life I could never unsee. I don't know how long I stood there in that cold basement, staring at the filing cabinet with my father's letters inside. My hands trembled and my heartbeat pounded so loud it felt like the whole house could hear it. Part of me wanted to slam the drawer shut, lock the basement door, and never speak of it again. Pretend it was all a bad dream. But another part, the part that had spent years wondering about the secrets beneath my home, refused to let go now that I'd had my first taste of the truth. I sat down on the concrete floor, dust settling on my jeans, and pulled out another bundle of envelopes. These were newer, the dates ranging from just a year before my father died to only a few months prior. I untied the twine with clumsy fingers and opened the first one. Clara, I'm sorry I can't be there this week. Work is complicated, and Eleanor is asking questions. But tell Lily and James I love them. I'll send what I can through the account. You know which one. Stay patient. Soon, I'll figure out a way for us to be together more openly. You deserve that. My stomach twisted. Lily and James, names, children, my half-siblings. The reality of it crashed over me in waves. My father hadn't just had a fling. He'd had a second family, one he had hidden carefully, deliberately, while raising me under the same roof as my mother. I shoved the letter back into the pile, my hands shaking, but I couldn't stop. I tore open another one, the paper ripping under the force of my fingers. The money has been tight, but I'll make it work. Don't let the children worry. Tell them their father is proud of them. One day, they'll understand why I couldn't always be there. One day, everything will make sense. I pressed the paper against my chest and closed my eyes, fighting back tears. My father, the man I had idolized as a child, the man who told me the value of honesty and discipline, had built his life on lies. He'd been providing for another family while my mother worked herself ragged to keep our house in order, never once suspecting, or perhaps suspecting too much. Or maybe she did know. Maybe that was why she was always so protective of the basement. Maybe the locked door wasn't about keeping me safe at all. Maybe it was about keeping the truth buried. The thought made me dizzy. I went back to the drawer and dug deeper. Beneath the stacks of envelopes were manila folders filled with documents, bank statements, receipts, even photographs. My hand stilled on a single photo that slipped out from between the papers. It was my father, smiling in a way I hadn't seen him smile in years, his arm around a woman I could only assume was Clara. She was beautiful, with dark hair and kind eyes, holding a little girl on her hip while a boy stood proudly in front of them. The girl couldn't have been more than 4. The boy looked about 7. My throat tightened. I didn't just have names now. I had faces. Real, tangible proof of another family. A family that looked happy, complete. And what about us? Were we just his other family? The ones he kept out of sight so he could play the role of devoted husband elsewhere? Or were we the official ones, while Clara and her children were the hidden shadows? Neither answer made me feel any better. I tucked the photograph back into the folder, but something else caught my attention. At the bottom of the drawer was a thick envelope, different from the rest. It wasn't tied neatly with twine. It wasn't labeled with Clara's name. It was sealed shut with red wax, and on the front, in my father's unmistakable handwriting, was written only one word. Margot. The sight of my own name sent a chill down my spine. My breath hitched. My father had left something here. Not for Clara, not for Lily or James, but for me. With trembling hands, I broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter, dated just 3 weeks before his death. My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, then it means you've found the basement and opened the drawer I hoped you'd never touch. I wanted to protect you from this truth for as long as possible, but I know you, my daughter, your curiosity is stronger than your fear. You were always too much like me in that way. There are things about my life that I never told you, things I'm ashamed of. You may already know the outlines. Clara, the children. But there is more, Margot. Much more. What I've built is dangerous, and the past will not rest forever. If you found this, then you must promise me one thing. Do not trust everyone around you, even those closest to you, especially your mother. She knows more than she admits. She has her own secrets, and some of them are darker than mine. I wish I could explain everything here, but it's too much for a letter. Look deeper in the basement. You'll find the safe. The key is hidden where the light never shines. Only then will you understand why I did what I did. I love you, Margot, more than I ever found the courage to say. I sat there on the floor, the letter shaking in my hands. My heart felt like it had stopped beating. My father wasn't just confessing to having another family. He was warning me about my own mother. The basement seemed to grow colder around me, shadows stretching deeper as though the walls themselves were listening. Had my entire life been a lie? What exactly had my mother known? And what was hidden in the safe he spoke of, the one he claimed would explain everything? I folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into the envelope with my name. My chest felt heavy with the weight of betrayal, fear, and something else I didn't want to name: suspicion. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I could trust my mother at all, and I realized, with a sharp clarity that chilled me, that the basement wasn't just a room of secrets. It was the beginning of a labyrinth, one that could unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, my father, and myself. I don't remember how long I sat there on the cold floor of the basement, my eyes fixed on the folders inside the safe. My hands trembled as I turned page after page, photo after photo, document after document, each one dragging me deeper into a story I hadn't asked to be a part of. My father had lied. My mother had lied. And now the only truth I had left was this mountain of evidence, buried under our house like a coffin. The photographs lingered in my mind the most. Not just the smiling faces of Clara and the children, but the other ones, the darker ones. My father in hotel lobbies with men I didn't recognize, meetings in places that looked expensive, dangerous, private. I flipped one photo over and read the note scrawled on the back in his tight handwriting. S Project, 2008. What was Project S? Another document caught my attention. A notarized contract written in legal jargon I could barely understand. My father's signature was there at the bottom, but the name he had signed wasn't Michael Whitmore. It was someone else entirely, Stephen Gray. I pressed a hand to my mouth, stifling a gasp. My father had been living under another identity. That wasn't just infidelity. That was crime. I tried to process what this meant. Was he involved in something illegal? Was Clara part of it? Or had she been just another casualty of his double life? My eyes blurred with tears as I thought about the kind man I remembered from childhood. The man who read me bedtime stories and told me never to lie. That man had been a ghost, a mask. The folder grew heavier in my lap as I turned another page. This time it wasn't a photograph, but a typed letter addressed directly to someone named Eleanor Whitmore. My mother. The words were sharp, threatening, the kind of language used when someone has leverage over another. Mrs. Whitmore, you and your husband have enjoyed the protection of our arrangement for years, but protection comes at a cost. If you fail to keep your side of the agreement, your daughter may one day learn the truth you've been hiding from her. I suggest you remember what's at stake before making reckless decisions. Consider this your final warning. The letter wasn't signed, but there was a symbol stamped at the bottom, a circle with an S carved through it like a dagger, the same S I had seen on the key. My blood ran cold. So my mother had known. She had been part of this. Maybe not willingly, maybe not proudly, but she had been part of whatever web my father had woven. She hadn't been protecting me all these years, and she had been protecting herself. Protecting her lies. And suddenly, the locked basement, her trembling hands, her constant insistence that I never come down here, it all made sense. She wasn't afraid for me. She was afraid of what I might discover. I shoved the documents back into the safe and closed it with a loud metallic click. My breathing came in short, shallow bursts. I didn't know what scared me more, the evidence of my father's second life, or the realization that my mother might have been complicit in all of it. When I finally dragged myself upstairs, the house seemed different. The shadows in the hallway felt thicker, the air heavier. My mother's door was still shut. I pressed my ear against it and listened. For a moment, I thought I heard movement inside, the faint sound of someone pacing. But then it went quiet. I backed away quickly, my heart pounding. I knew one thing. I couldn't confront her yet, not until I understood more. If my father's warning was true, then my mother was capable of things I couldn't even imagine. And if she realized I had found the basement, if she knew I had seen the documents, no, I had to be careful. I had to act normal. That night, lying in bed, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps outside my room. Every flicker of shadow looked like someone watching me. I clutched the envelope with my name on it under my pillow, as if my father's final words could protect me. By morning, I had made a decision. I would go back to the basement when my mother left the house, and I would read every last page of those folders. I needed answers, not half-truths, not warnings, not shadows. I needed to know what my father had done, what my mother was hiding, and why the word Project S made my skin crawl with fear. Because whatever this was, it wasn't just about an affair. It wasn't just about lies. It was something larger, something dangerous. And I had the sickening feeling that my father's death hadn't been an accident. And if I wasn't careful, I might be next. The following afternoon, I waited until my mother left for her usual errands. She was meticulous about her schedule, almost predictable. Grocery shopping on Wednesdays, church meetings on Fridays. That predictability was the only reason I felt safe enough to slip back into the basement. I descended the creaking steps with the key clutched tightly in my palm, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air down there seemed colder than before, heavier, as though the secrets themselves were pressing against me. Dust floated in the weak light of the single bulb overhead, and the faint hum of the house above echoed through the pipes like whispers. I knelt in front of the safe, inserted the key, and opened it once more. The folders were still there, waiting for me like patient predators. I pulled out a thick one labeled only with a number, S14. Inside were reports, typewritten pages filled with language that sounded official, almost clinical. References to assets, subjects, and containment protocols. The words chilled me. This wasn't about family affairs or secret bank accounts. This was something far more sinister. One page in particular caught my attention. It described the movement of Subject L between two undisclosed locations, with a note at the bottom. Handler, M. Whitmore. Secondary, E. Whitmore. My breath caught. E. Whitmore. That was my mother. I read the line again, my hands trembling so badly that the paper shook. My father hadn't acted alone. My mother's name was right there, written in black ink, tied to whatever this operation was. The pages blurred as questions crashed over me. What was Subject L? A person? A project? Something else entirely? And why had both my parents been involved? I flipped deeper into the folder and found photographs clipped to one page. They were grainy, black and white images of a building I didn't recognize. A warehouse, maybe, or some kind of research facility. In one photo, a man was being escorted inside by two others in suits. His face was partially obscured, but the desperation in his posture, the way he strained against their grip, made my stomach turn. At the bottom of the photo was another stamp, the circle with the jagged S. That same mark again. I shoved the papers back into the folder, my pulse quickening. My father's double life wasn't just about another woman. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about involvement in something dangerous, organized, and possibly criminal. And my mother had been right beside him the entire time. I was about to reach for another folder when I froze. A sound. At first it was faint, almost like a shift in the pipes. But then I heard it again, the unmistakable creak of a floorboard above me. Someone was moving upstairs. I quickly shut the folder, stuffed it back into the safe, and closed the door with a loud, metallic click. My breathing grew ragged as I pulled the chain of the light, plunging the basement into darkness. My heart pounded in my ears as I pressed myself against the wall, straining to listen. Footsteps, slow, heavy, moving across the floor above the basement door. I clutched the key so tightly it dug into my palm, the jagged edges biting into my skin. My mind raced. Was it my mother, home earlier than expected, or was it someone else entirely? The footsteps paused directly above me, right by the basement entrance. For what felt like an eternity, silence stretched through the house, broken only by the sound of my own shallow breaths. And then, just as suddenly as they had come, the footsteps moved away. A door clicked shut somewhere upstairs. I stayed frozen in the dark, my body trembling, my throat dry. Whoever it was, they had been listening, waiting. Finally, when I was sure the house was silent again, I crept up the stairs and closed the basement door as quietly as possible. My hands were slick with sweat, and my pulse still raced like I'd run miles. One thing was clear. I wasn't alone in this. Someone else knew what was down there, and they wanted me to find it, or to stay away. I couldn't tell which. That evening, when my mother returned home, I watched her more carefully than I ever had before. She moved through the kitchen with her usual composure, unpacking groceries with mechanical precision, her face unreadable. But now, with what I had seen in the basement, every gesture looked different. Every silence seemed heavier. I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to scroll through my phone while studying her. My father's words echoed in my head. Do not trust everyone around you, especially your mother. Margot, she said finally without looking up, you've been quiet today. My throat tightened. She was probing me, testing me, the way she always did when she thought something was off. I forced a small smile, just tired. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine for the briefest second, sharp and calculating, before returning to the bag of vegetables she was unpacking. Tired, she repeated softly, as though the word carried a hidden meaning only she understood. The silence that followed was unbearable. My mother was not a woman of wasted words, but now the air between us felt like a battlefield, filled with invisible landmines. One wrong move, one wrong sentence, and everything would explode. I wanted to scream at her. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you lie to me all these years? What is Project S? But instead, I asked something else, something safer. Do you ever miss Dad? I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound casual. The grocery bag crinkled loudly as she froze for a split second. Then she straightened, her hands folding neatly on the counter. Every day, she said, her tone calm but too controlled. I studied her face. There was no sadness in her eyes, no warmth, only calculation. I found one of his old letters, I lied, testing her reaction, in a box of things in the attic. Her eyes sharpened immediately, though she tried to mask it. What kind of letter? The question was too quick, too pointed. She wasn't curious. She was cautious, defensive. I shrugged, feigning disinterest. Just something about work. Didn't really understand it. For the first time, her mask cracked. A flicker of something, fear, maybe even anger, passed across her face before she smoothed it away. Margot, you know better than to go through your father's things. Some things are better left alone. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. They were almost identical to the warning in my father's final letter. But while his voice had carried a note of concern, hers carried something else entirely. Control. I decided to push just a little further. What about Clara? I asked quietly. The glass of water in her hand slipped, shattering on the tile floor. For a moment, neither of us moved. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. She bent to pick up the pieces, her movements sharp and deliberate. Where did you hear that name? She demanded, her voice low and dangerous. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay steady. I told you, I found a letter. Her hands tightened around the shards of glass until I worried she might cut herself, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she dropped the pieces into the trash, washed her hands slowly, and turned back to me with a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Margot," she said softly, "your father was not the man you thought he was. He kept many secrets, some of them. You're better off not knowing." I swallowed hard. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't even trying to cover it up. She was telling me, in her own way, that she knew exactly what I was hinting at, and she wanted to keep me afraid. But what terrified me most was the realization that she wasn't shocked by my questions. She wasn't confused. She already knew. She had always known. That night, lying in my bed, I couldn't shake the image of her standing in the kitchen, the shattered glass at her feet, her smile cold and deliberate. My father had warned me not to trust her. And now, more than ever, I understood why. Because my mother wasn't just hiding something, she was protecting it, guarding it, and I was no longer sure what she was capable of doing to keep me silent. The morning after our tense conversation in the kitchen, I woke with a heaviness in my chest that no amount of coffee could shake. My mother's reaction to Clara's name had been too strong, too raw. It wasn't the response of someone caught off guard. It was the response of someone whose greatest fear had been spoken out loud. I couldn't stay passive anymore. If my father's warnings were true, and if my mother really knew more than she admitted, then the only way forward was to find out for myself. That meant watching her, even if it meant becoming the very kind of paranoid person I once pitied. She left the house shortly after noon, locking the door behind her as always. I gave her a 5-minute head start, then grabbed my keys and slipped into my car, following from a safe distance. My mother wasn't a reckless driver. She obeyed every stop sign, every speed limit. But she wasn't heading to the grocery store this time. She wasn't going to church, either. She drove straight out of town, down a long stretch of road that cut through the woods. I kept my distance, praying she wouldn't notice me trailing behind. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. After about 20 minutes, she turned onto an unmarked gravel road. My pulse quickened as I slowed, letting her get ahead just enough that I wouldn't be obvious. The trees thickened around me, the air damp and heavy. And then I saw it. A building hidden at the end of the road. It wasn't a house. It wasn't a store. It was a warehouse, low and gray, with barred windows and a chain-link fence surrounding it. A place that didn't belong in the middle of the forest. I parked my car a safe distance away and crouched low, watching as my mother got out of hers. She approached the gate, where a man in a dark jacket was waiting. He didn't look like a neighbor or a friend. He looked like security. The man nodded to her, unlocked the gate, and let her inside. I ducked lower, my heart hammering. What was she doing here? What was this place? Through the trees, I saw her enter the warehouse. For a few long minutes, nothing happened. Then I noticed movement inside, the faint glow of fluorescent lights flickering through the windows. Shadows of people passed across them. I shifted, trying to get a better angle, and that's when I saw something that froze me in place. In one of the windows, for just a second, I caught a glimpse of a child. A young girl with dark hair, her face pale against the harsh lighting. She pressed her hands to the glass and looked out into the woods, her eyes wide and frightened. And then she was pulled away by someone I couldn't see. My stomach lurched. The girl couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Who was she? What was she doing in that place? And why was my mother walking so casually inside as if she belonged there? I stayed hidden for nearly an hour, watching, waiting, my nerves stretched taut. When my mother finally emerged, she looked calm, collected, as though she'd just finished running errands. The man at the gate nodded again, and she drove away. I waited until she was gone before approaching the fence. Up close, the warehouse looked even more menacing. A sign was bolted to the gate, authorized personnel only. There were cameras on the corners, their lenses sweeping across the perimeter. Whoever owned this place, they didn't want anyone snooping. I backed away, my mind racing. My father's letters, the Project S documents, the photos, they all pointed to something bigger, something organized, And now my mother was walking straight into the heart of it. I didn't know what was happening inside that warehouse, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My mother wasn't just hiding the past. She was still part of it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pale little girl's face pressed against the glass of that warehouse window. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, and it tore at me. Whoever she was, she didn't belong in that place. And my mother's calmness as she entered and left. It made my blood run cold. By morning, my decision was made. I had to see inside for myself. I waited until late evening, when the woods around the gravel road grew darker, cloaked in shadows. My mother was home that night, sitting in the living room, reading as though nothing was wrong. But my mind was already elsewhere. I parked my car far down the road and approached the warehouse on foot, keeping to the trees. The chain-link fence loomed ahead of me, its metal glinting faintly in the moonlight. A single floodlight buzzed above the gate, casting a cold glow across the clearing. I crouched low, my breath shallow, my pulse racing. There were cameras. I counted at least 3, sweeping across the perimeter. But I noticed something else, too. A section of fence in the back, where the metal was bent and loose at the bottom. Someone had tried to crawl under before, maybe security hadn't noticed. Or maybe they didn't care, because they never expected anyone out here. I dropped to the ground and slid through, scraping my hands and knees on the gravel. The sound of my own heartbeat seemed deafening in the silence. On the other side, I crouched low, moving slowly toward the side of the building. Up close, the warehouse looked even less like a storage facility and more like a prison. The windows were small and barred, the walls thick and reinforced. I pressed myself against the cold metal siding, inching along until I found a door near the back. To my surprise, it wasn't locked, just a simple push handle. I hesitated, my fingers hovering above it. If I went inside, there would be no turning back. Whatever I found in there would change everything, maybe even put me in danger. But then I remembered the girl's eyes. I pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The air hit me immediately, stale, metallic, tinged with something that smelled faintly of antiseptic. The hallway stretched out in front of me, lined with doors. Harsh fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in a sickly glow. I moved quietly, my footsteps muffled on the concrete floor. From behind one of the doors I heard voices, muffled but distinct. A man's deep tone, authoritative, and then my mother's voice. I froze, pressing my back against the wall, straining to hear. "We can't keep them here forever," she was saying. "It's only a matter of time before someone notices." The man's reply was sharp. "Our arrangement stands. The funding depends on it. If you want protection, you'll follow orders. Protection, funding, orders." The words made my skin crawl. I crept further down the hallway until I reached a door with a small window at the top. Peering through, I saw what I had dreaded. A room with 3 narrow beds, each one occupied by a child. Their ages varied, maybe between 6 and 12. The little girl I'd seen at the window was there, curled up on her bed, her eyes wide open in the darkness. I covered my mouth with my hand, fighting back a sob. Children. They were keeping children here. I didn't know why. I didn't know what Project S truly was. But in that moment, I understood one thing with terrifying clarity. My mother was part of something monstrous. A sudden sound jolted me, footsteps approaching from the far end of the hall. I ducked into a dark corner, pressing myself against the wall. A guard walked past, his keys jangling at his belt, his eyes scanning the hallway without suspicion. He didn't see me. My hands shook as I forced myself to breathe quietly. I couldn't be caught. Not now. Not before I figured out how to get those children out. When the guard disappeared around the corner, I slipped back toward the exit, my mind racing. I couldn't do this alone. I needed proof, undeniable proof of what was happening here. And I needed to decide who, if anyone, I could trust with it. Because if my mother was involved, then going to her wasn't an option. And if my father's death was truly connected to this, then I had just stepped into the same trap that had killed him. I barely slept after sneaking into the warehouse. Every sound outside my window made me jolt awake, convinced someone had followed me home. Every shadow in the corner of my room looked like it might spring to life. The image of those children, especially the little girl pressing her hands to the glass, haunted me, and the sound of my mother's voice inside that place burned itself into my memory. By morning, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. At some point, I would have to confront her. I found her in the kitchen, as always, pouring herself a cup of coffee. The ordinary scene looked grotesque now, like a mask stretched too thin. I sat down across from her, gripping the table to steady my shaking hands. "Mom," I said, my voice low but firm. "I know." She didn't look surprised. She didn't even flinch. She simply set her cup down and folded her hands in front of her, studying me with eyes that were sharp and unblinking. "What exactly do you think you know, Margot?" Her calmness terrified me more than anger ever could. It was the calm of someone who had been preparing for this moment. "I followed you," I whispered. "I saw the warehouse. I saw the children. And I heard you." For a long moment, silence filled the kitchen. Then, slowly, she exhaled. "You shouldn't have done that." The way she said it, not with fury, but with disappointment, almost pity, made me feel like I was a child again, being scolded for breaking a rule. But this was no ordinary rule. This was life and death. "Why?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Why are you part of this? What is Project S? Who are those children?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't understand, Margot. Your father never wanted you involved. He tried to protect you, but he was weak, too weak to stay out of it." I did what I had to do. "Protect me?" I shouted, slamming my fist on the table. "By locking children in a warehouse? By lying to me my whole life?" Her eyes flashed with something sharp. Anger, finally. "By keeping you alive," she snapped. "Do you think you'd even be here if I hadn't agreed to their terms? If I hadn't kept my part of the arrangement? You're naive, Margot. You think the world is black and white. But your father knew the truth. Power protects those who obey it, and destroys those who don't." Her words made my stomach twist. She wasn't denying it. She was justifying it. I leaned forward, my voice shaking. "So, Dad's death? Was it really a heart attack?" For the first time, she hesitated. Her gaze faltered just slightly, then hardened again. "He broke the rules. That's all you need to know." My chest tightened. My father hadn't just died. He had been silenced. And my mother knew it. I rose from my chair, my whole body trembling. "I'm not going to be part of this. I won't stay silent." Her expression didn't change, but her voice grew colder than I had ever heard it. "And who will you tell? The police? The same people who are paid to look the other way? You'll only make yourself a target, Margot. You think you've uncovered something no one else knows? You've just scratched the surface. If you step out of line, you'll end up exactly where your father did." Her threat hung in the air like smoke, choking me. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Then maybe it's worth it," I whispered. "Maybe the truth matters more than survival." She shook her head slowly, almost sadly, as though I were a foolish child. "You are my daughter. And I love you. But if you force me to choose between you and everything I've built to keep us safe, I will choose survival." The room seemed to close in on me. For the first time in my life, I realized my mother was not my protector. She was my enemy. She was my... I backed away from the table, my heart pounding. I didn't know where I would go, or who I could trust, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Staying here, under her roof, was no longer an option. Because the danger wasn't just outside, in the warehouse, or in the mysterious organization my father had been tangled in. The danger was sitting right in front of me, and she was smiling.